Okay, so we're starting to record. Okay, so this is probably the most important part of these slides here, which is the infinitely and indefinitely repeated games. And this is basically the most important part of this section on price fixing and coordination. Okay, so let's say we are at a game which is infinitely or indefinitely repeated. Okay, so those two things will have the same effect. Okay, but to make it simpler, maybe you'd want to think about, for example, an infinitely repeated. So for sure, it will be infinitely repeated. But in the discussion here, it's general enough to include the case of the indefinitely repeated games when you don't know when the game will end. Okay. So babalik tayo dito. So the firm valuation for a profit stream of indefinite duration, okay, it will apply a discount factor of R, big R, to the expected cash flow in any period. Okay, so ang discount factor R, so gusto ko lang balikan to because baka we skipped it. We ended with this, but we wanted to make sure that we understand the discount factor R. So this comes from the fact that money today is more valuable than money tomorrow. So that money tomorrow, you apply a discount value R such that 1 peso today is equal, a 1 peso in the future, I should say, 1 peso in the future is worth R today. So that's why you discount it. You discount it to make it equal to cash today. Okay. So makikita niyo yan sa equation later on, which I'll point out to you soon. So profits are profits at each play of the game. Okay. So there'll be a pie. Okay, so again, this game will be infinitely repeated. So you can imagine these profits to be coming in every period, indefinitely or infinitely. P is the probability that the market interaction will continue to the next period. So P is probability of reaching period 1, P squared, reaching period 2, and so on. So P raised to the T times pi is the profit stream that the firm actually expects to receive in period T. If the game reaches T periods ahead, okay, it can stop. It can stop any period before T at that given probability P. So ito si expected value of this profit stream. Okay, so as you can see, first you say that P is equal to 1. So that means infinitely siya. That will allow us to focus on the R. Okay. So the R is the discount factor. Okay. Pansin niyo dito sa first period, the pi, the coefficient is 1. So the R is essentially equal to 1 because the value of money today is equal to 1. Each peso earned today is equal to 1 peso. Okay. Tomorrow, yung peso that you will earn tomorrow must be discounted by R. So tomorrow's peso is now worth R. Okay. Similarly, 2 periods from now, 2 periods peso is worth R squared, and so on and so forth. Okay, so paliit ng paliit. The further away it is, it's going to be geometrically becoming less valuable to you. Okay. Now, ipasok natin si P, which is the probability. So as you can see, the P and the R, they just go together. And in fact, in the next line, okay, well, not in the next line, in the last bullet, it says here that rho, we can think of rho as just equal to P times R. So whenever you see a PR, that's why the PR is always together, because the P times R can be thought of jointly as a probability adjusted discount factor. Wherein this is R is the discount factor, but then if you multiply it with a P, which is less than 1, possibly, then it's a probability adjusted discount factor. What else do we, let's focus again on this first line. So, pag mataas si R, that means, okay, you're valuing future profits higher, right? In fact, let's say that it's really close to 1, like 0.9. So that means future profits are almost as valuable as current profits. So when the R goes up, that means all of these future things become more valuable, right? But then pag si R bumaba, all of these future profits fall in value. even if the profits themselves are all constant. Pansin nyo, the pie doesn't really change. That's really for analytic convenience. Pero for any given set of pies, let's say 100, 200, 150, etc., it can be different. Whatever it is, pag nagbaba ang R, okay, that means the future is less valuable because everything in the future drops down by that amount na nagbaba ng R. Or pag umakyat yung R, everything in the future becomes more valuable. But for analytical convenience for this undergraduate class, we'll just assume that everything is the same. All of the future profit streams are the same. Okay, so we can evaluate this and do some manipulations. So you can just take out the row or the P times R, and napansin nyo, it becomes this. And this is just the same as the V itself. So that's why you replace this whole thing in brackets or in parentheses as V pi R here. So current stream, the value of essentially cooperating, of getting this profit stream. The value of getting this profit stream is equal to today's value plus this probability adjusted discount factor times, again, the whole thing, the value of the entire stream. So if you can simplify it further by putting the V's together, then you'll get that the value of the profit stream is equal to the infinite or indefinite payout. Again, every period, payout mo is pi. Okay. Multiplied by 1 over 1 minus rho, and rho is, again, the probability adjusted discount factor, which is P and R. So let's focus on this one. What affects the value of this profit stream, capital V? Siyempre, if at each period tataas yung profit na makukuha mo, tataas yan. Siyempre, right? Also, though, what's important is itong row, right? If the row rises, 1 minus 1 over row becomes what? When this row becomes close to 1, what happens to 1 over 1 minus row? Lalaki or liliit?
Liliit po, sir.
Well, liliit si 1 minus row, pero si 1 over 1 minus row, lalaki. Okay? Because 1 over a smaller number becomes a big number. Remember, this is 1 over. It's divided by. Okay? So, liliit to, lalaki yung buo, lalaki yung profit stream. Okay? So, that just means, again, babalik tayo dun sa interpretation ng row, which is in P times R. Pag tumaas si R, tataas yung value ng lahat ng makukuha mo. Therefore, matataas rin dapat ito. Okay? Does that make sense? Similarly, if the game is expected to go on forever, then tataas yung value ng mga profit you'll get further into the future. So tataas rin yung value nito. Okay, so thumbs up if that's makes sense to everyone. We're just making sure everything is connecting, right? So C row is just P times R. So you can imagine an increase in R, an increase in P is essentially an increase in row. And an increase in row will just increase the total present value of this profit stream. Okay. So let's think about some trigger strategies. Okay. So we are playing this infinite game, and a trigger strategy is when something happens that's a trigger, that something is a trigger, then the play will change. Okay, then the actions or the strategies will change. So it says here that many variants of the trigger strategy that would not work in the finitely repeated game. Again, we discussed that the finitely repeated game is essentially a one period game repeated n times. But in this one, let's think about this trigger strategy. Each player promises to play the cooperative game upon which all players have agreed, as long as the history of the game to that point does not reveal defections. Should there be any defections or deviations, then the trigger strategy player promises to revert to the one-shot Nash equilibrium. Okay. So ibig sabihin nito, during the course of the game, we'll try to cooperate and have that elevated profit. But once I detect the deviation, everyone will go back to the Nash equilibrium, which, like we said earlier, is a state which is self-enforcing. Pag nasa Nash equilibrium ka na, then no one would want to leave necessarily the Nash equilibrium. So let's consider the duopoly example for both Bertrand and Cournot. So here you've got profits of pi m, okay? And dahil duopoly siya, 1/2 of the monopoly profit, okay? So you decide, you share, okay? Pi m is half of the monopoly profit generated by a price fixing agreement between the two. Pi d is the profit earned if the firm deviates from the agreement, okay? And pi n is the non-cooperative Nash equilibrium profit to each firm. Now, the 1 period deviation is higher than when you share the monopoly, and it's higher than under Nash equilibrium, right? And I think here in the course, in the slides, we'll talk about what the exact values are for Bertrand and Cournot. Okay. If it's not here in these slides, then you will do it in the homework. Okay. So makakalculate nyo to. Sa Cournot, sa duopoly, you can get what the monopoly profit is and then just share it. Yung non-cooperative Nash ng Cournot and Bertrand, we already studied that and you're able to calculate that. Okay. And then from here, this one is the profit, this pi d is the profit earned if the firm deviates from the agreement, wherein everyone agrees to produce either the Cournot quantity, the monopoly quantity. So when everyone agrees to produce the monopoly quantity, there is this incentive to produce more under Cournot. Okay. And there's an incentive to lower the price if you are Bertrand. Okay. And that will generate for you a 1 period profit of pi d greater than the agreement. But once you have this pi deviation, then everyone will go back to Nash, which is again lower than everything else. And then forever can Nash. Okay, so that's the thing that we're trying to, the strategy set that we're trying to evaluate right now. So a firm whose rival is following the strategy, trigger strategy, faces the choice, right? To continue to cooperate and earn pi m, or you defect, earn pi d for 1 period, and earn pi n for every subsequent period. Okay, because the defection will trigger the rival to move to the non-cooperative equilibrium. Which again, I should stress that the non-cooperative equilibrium in this case is self-reinforcing because it's the Nash equilibrium. Okay, so I think these are kind of end before. Okay, so compare gains and losses in terms of present values, right? So these are values in terms of money now. That's why it's called a present value. Okay. Contrast that to a future value wherein it's the value of money, like n periods in the future. So these are all money today. So yung present value ng profits from sticking to the agreement is this. And this is simply what we talked about here. That's why we spent some time dealing with this, right? Because this is just the stream of profits from following the agreement. And we're copying what we worked on earlier, which is ito, VC. Okay, so pansin mo, the PMs are the same. This row is essentially P times R, and then your blah, 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 blah. And so the value of cooperating is pi m divided by 1 over rho, which is the result we had earlier. Now, the present value of profits from deviating are the following. First, you get the high pi d. And then in the subsequent periods, future, then you'll get pi n. So yung mapapansin in the future is actually just, if you remove this pi, the future is just pi n plus rho. I mean, imagine taking out the rho. pi n plus rho pi n plus rho 2 pi n and so on. So this second part is associated with this second part here, okay? Wherein this second part is just rho, a discounted value of this entire stream of the Nash equilibrium. Okay. Let me just go to the other room first. Let's pause. Okay. Sorry, may parang rigodon sa kwarto dito. Okay. So let's talk about deviations. So ito si deviation is just the sum of the one-shot deviation here, which is higher than the monopoly, like we said. But then all future values that you'll get from working or from selling in this industry will be pi n, because everyone commits to the Nash equilibrium here. And this section here is just rho times the value of the stream of pi n, indefinite stream of pi n. So that's why it's rho times pi n over 1 minus rho. Now, cheating is not profitable if VC is greater than VD. So cooperation is greater than deviation. Okay? VC is greater than VN. If this is true, so again, we're just replacing VC here on the left side and VD on the right side, multiplying both sides by 1 minus rho, simplifying will give you a critical value of rho star. And what this is saying is that for any rho greater than this rho star, then firms will stick to the cartel agreement because VC is greater than VD. Okay. So first, let's think about the logic of rho greater than rho star. Okay. Alam natin na pag tumaas si rho, that means future values will become more important than before, right? In fact, at the limit, pag si rho is equal to 1, then future values is really, really important because an infinite number of pi n's in the future will defeat one single pi m today, right? So extreme yun. So pag tumaas si rho, that means this side here, which is rho times PM, rho times rho squared times pi, all of this becomes more important. All of this becomes more important here. And syempre, mas mataas si pi m than pi n. So therefore, talagang mas lalaki ang VC relative to VD pag lumaki si rho. Okay. Intuitively, this just says that if rho or the probability discount factor becomes large, then that means the benefits of having this higher profits indefinitely is higher than having a lower profits indefinitely, because that's just the Nash equilibrium. And this gives you this critical value na kailangan greater siya than this critical value. For any rho that's less than that, then deviation will surely occur because everyone will have, at least someone will have the will deviate, and this stream of profits will then happen if the rho is less than rho star. Next is pag-usapan natin what creates si rho star. Okay, what makes for the value of rho star, which is ito, which is just a ratio of the difference in profits. The numerator is pi d, which is the high deviation, minus pi m, which is the forever monopoly profit under cooperation, divided by pi d minus pi n. Okay, so since alam natin that pi n is less than pi m, then this is less than 1 for sure. Okay, so that's the first thing. But second thing is that pag mataas siya, okay, pag mataas siya, that means mas mahirap there's less row that will allow for cooperation to happen. If row star is very high, like if row star itself is close to 1, then that means it's very difficult for the oligopoly or the cartel to actually stick to the agreement. Okay. So you'd want, for the cartel, you'd want to have this row, okay, row star, I should say, to be low. Because if the row star is low, then there's a better chance for the actual row to be higher than the row star. So what would make this row star to be low? Okay. This row star will be low if the difference between pi d and pi m is actually low. Okay. So the difference between pi d and pi m, that's just the one-shot deviation. So importante dun sa row star yung one-shot difference, which is itong pi m tsaka yung pi d. That means the smaller the deviation here, the smaller the difference between pi m and pi d, the lower this row star is. And the lower this row star is, the more likely it is for the cartel to be self-sustaining. So pag mas malaki yung profit from deviation, if the value for that one period deviation is very high, then dun nagkakaroon ka ng problema dito sa row star. Kasi lalaki yung row star and liliit yung possibility that your row will actually be bigger than the row star. Okay. So that's what I'm trying to point out. This numerator is very important to the value of row star. This next slide sort of interprets what you've been talking about so far. So cheating on the cartel yields an immediate period gain of this. Starting next period, the punishment for cheating is a loss of profit of this much. The present value of that loss, itong loss, is this. The present value as of today when profit from cheating is realized is this one. Okay. You just multiply it by row because you're turning it into the present value. Cheating will be deterred if the gain is less than the cost in PV terms. So this is the gain from deviation and this is the cost of deviation, which will give you exactly the same derivation here. Now let's talk about, ito na nga yung nag-iisipan ko kanina na, there will probably be an example in the slides that sort of gives you these values, right? Okay. So for the Bertrand case, this is pi m, pi d, and pi n. Okay. The critical probability adjusted discount factor above which the duopolist can sustain cartel is rho is equal to 5.5. Okay. I think in the homework, this is the homework, right? It will ask you to prove this. Okay, and you prove that using exactly these computations that we have here. Okay. The formula that you had there. In the Cournot case, blah, 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 the critical rho is 0.529. Okay. So yung nakikita mo, ano yung mas maliit na rho? Ano yung mas maliit na rho? And dahil mas maliit siya, ano yung implication nun? Okay, so mas maliit yung rho ng Bertrand. Okay. Not by much, but mas maliit. But from the simple Bertrand example, it will be a little easier to sustain it because the probability that rho is greater than 0.5, okay, it's just a little bit higher than if the rho is greater than 0.53. Okay, because remember, the actual rho, which is ito, is determined by industry-specific factors, right? Whether, again, rho is what? P times R. And R is just the discount factor of money. And then P is industry specific in that it's possible that certain coordination will, the game itself will end at probability P. Suppose both firms playing Corno game believe that their interaction will always be repeated, P is equal to 1. The critical probability adjusted discount factor corresponds to the pure discount factor, R is 0.529. Neither firm will deviate as long as the firm's interstage R does not exceed 89%. If P is equal to 0.6, then R is greater than 0.529 divided by 0.6, and that's 0.882. Okay, so again, this is if P is not equal to 1. Okay, P is 0.6. So the successful collusion requires that the interest rate R does not exceed 141%, which is a less restrictive requirement. So general result, an indefinitely lived cartel is more sustainable the greater the probability that the firms will continue to interact, and the lower is the interest rate. Okay, so the interest rate dito is just the inverse of the R. Okay, so that's why I'm not quite keen on that, so never mind. But I'm just explaining what the interpretation of the slide is in terms of the interest rate. So the R and the interest rate, the big R and the interest rate are negatively related, inversely related. The more interesting thing here that I talked about earlier is that the indefinitely lived cartel is more sustainable the greater the P is, which is the probability that the firms will continue to interact. So the greater the P, the bigger the capital R, or the lower the interest rate, the more sustainable the indefinitely lived cartel is. So if you extend to cases where the number of firms is more than 2, just identify pi d greater than pi m greater than pi n for each firm, substituting this to the formula for the critical probability adjusted discount factor. So again, just to, if you were to use the condition on the trigger strategy that we talked about, all you need to do is calculate these things, which should be calculatable if you have a model of oligopoly interaction, because that will allow you to get pi n and pi d. Then you can apply the same technique here, and then it will tell you what the rho is, or the probability adjusted discount factor should be, that allows for cooperation to persist. Okay, so now that we've talked about rho and then when cooperation sort of can happen, that is when rho is high, right? Specifically when rho is higher than rho star, okay? So obstacles to the use of trigger strategy that we've talked about here. Strategy assumes that the cheating is detected quickly and punished swiftly. If detection and punishment takes time, then the defecting firms enjoy gains for more periods, and it raises the incentive to defect. Okay. So remember, dun sa ating computations, there's only one period wherein there's a defection, wherein that pi d happens. And if pi d occurs more, right, some of that future punishment of lower profits from the Nash equilibrium becomes weaker, right? The punishment becomes weaker. Yeah, the strategy may be too harsh and unforgiving given uncertainties and miscommunications. Market demand fluctuation can be shown in this one, in this picture. So for example, if the market demand fluctuates, then it's possible that the pi will fluctuate, even if everyone agrees, okay, to try to maximize your profits, right? Because people won't realize that, I am getting a lower profit, not because of the change in demand, but maybe I'm thinking I'm getting a lower profit because someone has defected. And if someone has defected, my profit goes down. Okay. So that's what this bullet is saying. Sometimes the strategy may be too harsh given uncertainties and miscommunication. Okay, so that if I see my profit go down, then I will initiate the punishment phase prematurely, because yung pala what happened was the demand shifted down now. That's why profits fell. So the decline in sales may be due to cheating by one of its partners or an unanticipated reduction in demand. So these obstacles can be overcome. Even if detection and punishment is not swift, it can still be effective if the probabilistic discount factor is sufficiently large, like we said. If that discount factor is very large, then your profits from cooperating really swamp out the profits from not cooperating, as we've just discussed. Modified trigger strategy can be implemented in the face of uncertainty. Retaliate only if sales or price fall outside some agreed range. In other words, pag extreme na yung price change, then it cannot be because of the usual seasonality and demand, for example. And then that's your signal that it's in fact someone has deviated from the profits, someone is enjoying above normal profits, and then everyone else has sales that go down. Right? Another modification, impose punishment swiftly after any deviation, but limit the period of punishment to a finite period of time. So the trigger strategy could be of the form, I will switch to Nash equilibrium for T periods if you deviate from our agreement, but will revert to our agreed cooperative strategy. Okay. So this modification is in fact seen in many empirical models and actual data of cartels that were caught, that there are periods when there will be a war, and then there are periods where everyone will cooperate. Now, what are the factors facilitating collusion? So there are 7 factors that make successful or profitable collusion likely. So these are high concentration, small number of firms, barriers to entry, frequent or regular orders, rapid market growth, technology and cost similarities, product homogeneity, and multi-market contact. Okay, so each of these will go through why these are the factors that are being considered. Parenthetically, these are also the same factors that, for example, the competition agency will also look at when trying to assess whether there might be collusion in a particular industry. Okay. But we'll talk a little bit more about how the nuts and bolts of how a competition agency would face this to sort of forecast or to look ahead. What a competition agency would really want is proof of the agreement. Okay. All of these are structural factors that sort of lend credence to the probability or the possibility or the likelihood that there is in fact a cartel. But what would definitely land a case would be proof of coordination. All right, so now let's talk about factors facilitating collusion. So concentrated markets are a small number of firms. So they are more likely to find collusion in more concentrated markets. Reason 1. So increased concentration reduces the critical probability adjusted discount factor rho star. So again, if rho star goes down, then it's more likely that your industry has a rho that's bigger than rho star. That's the whole point of reason run, right? So pag mababa si rho star, then it's possible to find collusion. It's more likely to find collusion there. Okay, so suppose Bertrand model with n identical firms, profit from each period of each firm participating in the cartel is the following. So again, you're just dividing by m by n. Okay. The one-off monopoly profits, if it deviates, is by m. Okay, so the deviation is not profitable if by m over n times this infinite stream here, which is equal to this one, and it's greater than pi m. Okay, this is possible if that rho, okay, is greater than 1 over 1 over n. Okay, so essentially you can think about this as the rho star, which is a function of n. Okay. So what this is saying is that pag mataas yung n, okay, then that means rho has to be higher than 1 minus 1 over a very large number, or 1 minus something very small. So that means rho n becomes higher, right? Rho n becomes higher, the higher the n is, because this 1 over n becomes small. So that rho n moves toward, becomes closer to 1. Okay. And as we said, pag tumataas yung rho, if it becomes closer to 1, it's more difficult to maintain collusion. Okay. Because the critical value has to be greater than that. All right. So reason 2, returns to collusion falls as the number of members increase. Deviations to returns to deviation do not fall with n. So deviation is more profitable as industry concentration falls. Okay. So that just is this one. So pi over m goes down. Okay. So the value of cooperation goes down, the more n is. Okay, the next factor is significant barriers to entry. Okay, so easy entry undermines collusion. So when new firm enters, the entrant is not part of the cartel, forcing the other members to act more competitively. The entrant joins the cartel and therefore reduces the share of monopoly profits accruing to everyone. In either case, the profitability of the cartel is, and therefore the motivation to maintain cooperative behavior is diminished. Okay. Next, frequent or regular orders. So when orders are infrequent, it takes longer to punish a firm that cheats on the cartel agreement, making cheating more profitable. Irregularly sized orders also hamper collusive efforts. Frequency of orders. So the critical discount factor rho star is a per period discount factor that can be converted into an annual discount factor for a relevant time period. Now, the higher time between orders, the higher the critical factor will be. Okay, so monthly orders and rho star equal to 0.9 implies an annual discount factor of 0.9 raised to 12. If it's every 6 months, okay, so just twice a year, okay, rho star 0.9 implies an annual discount factor of 0.9 squared, which is 0.81. So yung rho star, effective rho star mo becomes lower here, right? So that less frequent orders, okay, which is this one, less frequent orders, implies it takes longer to detect and punish a firm that cheats on the cartel agreement. So again, the higher the rho star is, the more likely it's more difficult it is to sustain an agreement. Okay? Because kailangan your rho will actually have to be higher than this. Okay. Different order sizes. So suppose the Bertrand case. In the current period, T is equal to 0, large orders is received, has a profit of lambda pi m, okay, with lambda greater than 1. So that's a large order, it gives you extra profits, right? Later profits return to pi m per period. So the modified equation here gives you the condition for the cartel to be self-sustaining in the face of a large order, which is the following. So the first one just becomes rho, okay? And this rho, sorry, not rho, lambda, sorry. The first one becomes lambda, okay, which is this. Then this will become self-sustaining if this one is greater than deviation, which is, this is the deviation here. Okay, so the deviation will also benefit from a large order. So that's the thing, right? So ito si first period, pi m over n times large order. Okay, and but forever you'll get pi m over n. And then on the right side, you get this deviation here of lambda pi m. Okay, so when you deviate, and then all future profits will in fact be, in this case, in the Bertrand case, all future profits from pi n will be 0, right? Because the pi n from Bertrand is 0. Remember that under Bertrand, everyone prices to marginal cost. That's why wala ka ng rho squared pi n dito, blah, blah, blah. Everything is just 0. So you can simplify this, removing pi m, for instance, and then you'll get this relationship. Solving for rho gives you a critical probability adjusted discount factor function of n and lambda. Again, lambda is greater than 1. It's a large order in the current period or in the period of deviation. Yeah. So n is equal to 2 and lambda is equal to 1. A critical discount factor for collusion is rho 2 and 1 is 0.5. When n is equal to 2 and lambda is equal to 2. So notice what happened in this next bullet is tumaas. Okay? Tumaas yung x, nagkaroon ka ng large order. Okay? When lambda is greater than 1. The discount factor for that becomes 2/3. So because the critical discount factor is going up, it'll be difficult, much more difficult to sustain that collusion, right? And you can see it quite clearly here. The only reason, well, not the only reason, essentially from the math here, you can see it here is that the benefit from deviating becomes much higher because of that lambda. Okay. So the temptation to steal profits from that one-time extra order can be sufficiently great to undermine a cartel. Okay, so because that lambda, that rho star is increasing in lambda. Okay, rapid market growth is another factor here. So cartels are more likely to be sustainable in growing markets and more likely to be unstable in declining markets. Deviation early in the market's growth generates profits as usual, but now runs the risk of sacrificing larger profits that the cartel will generate as the market grows. When the market is declining, there's a stronger temptation to cheat and get out. Okay. So babalik tayo dun sa interpretation, dun sa equation. So rapid market growth, which is, well, I guess we can, no, let's go straight here to this one, right? Under rapid market growth, mataas tong pi m, okay? And therefore, it's easier to sustain VC, okay? Under decline, then that means si pi n, okay? Si pi m will go down, okay? And then it will start to meet pi n. So when pi m goes down, then the rho star becomes higher. Okay, under decline, right? Under decline, all of these future values here will fall. And when the future values fall, the profits from sticking to agreement will also fall. And therefore, there's more of an incentive to deviate today when mataas pa yung profits as opposed to waiting for tomorrow when pababa na yung profits. And that's the logic of the growing market. Under a growing market, it's easier to sustain the agreement. Where are we? Okay, next. Technological or cost symmetry. Symmetry among industry firms in terms of technology and cost is another feature supporting cartel formation. When firms have different costs, it will be more difficult to formulate a collusive agreement that both find satisfactory. In the Bertrand model, in which each firm has a marginal cost that rises with output, firms whose MC rises fastest will have the smallest output in the cartelized equilibrium n firms in the cartel. So profits of firm 1 is SI pi M, the share SI multiplied by total industry profit pi M. The number of firms is decreasing in the decreasing order of profits. So S1 will be the highest and Sn will be the lowest, and all of the S's sum to 1. For firm I to be willing to remain in the cartel, the condition is SI pi M times this infinite stream, which is equal to this. We've already derived that, must be greater than pi m, which is the one-time deviation, okay, which will give you SI. And then SI pi m, which is this, which is equal to this, greater than pi m, leads to an SI greater than 1 minus rho, or a rho, which is a function of SI, which has to be greater than 1 minus SI. When the profit shares are different, based on, again, this S share here, okay, firms with the lowest profit share, if the profit share here is lowest, then 1 minus the lowest share is high, and that means your critical rho is higher. The smaller the share of the smallest firm, the higher the discount factor that has to be for the collusion to be sustainable. So it's harder to maintain that agreement because there is this one firm which has the lowest profit share. This one has the highest likelihood of deviation because it's more likely that the rho will be in fact be less than this, which is 1 minus S. High. So mas madaling i-sustain ang collusion if everyone has a similar profit share, if it's just divided by n. Multi-market contact. Rival firms may compete in several distinct markets. So the issue is, would competing with the same set of rivals in many markets at one point in time be similar to, in some respects, to competing in the same market over several points in time? Will cheating in one market risk punishment and loss of cartel profits in the other markets? It suggests that multi-market contact may be a feature that facilitates collusion. However, time is different from space, so intuition is somewhat misleading. In a multi-market case, a firm can cheat on all of its collusive agreements across different markets at the same point in time, whereas it requires the passage of time in cheating across different time periods. So the intuition may be correct if colluding firms have asymmetric market shares in the different markets in which they compete. So let's say A and B, firms A and B compete in markets 1 and 2. Pi m are the aggregate profits in each market per period. The market share of A in each of these markets are respectively SAI and SA2, where in SA1 and SA2, where SAI or 1, okay, is in fact greater than 1/2. So dominant siya in market 1 and hindi siya dominant in market 2. Okay. So the market share of B, okay, is the opposite. SB1 is less than 1/2 and SB2 is greater than 1/2. Okay. So in other words, A is dominant in market 1 and B is dominant in market 2, greater than 1/2. Suppose the time preferences and discount rates are the same. So it's the same probability adjusted discount factor, the same rho. Market competition in each market is Bertrand, which is price competition. If markets are treated separately, then collusion is sustainable in market 1 only if the probability adjusted discount factor in each firm is greater than 1. So it's greater than 1/2, okay? Or greater than 1 minus SB, which itself is greater than 1/2, right? Because 1 minus SB1 is greater than 1/2, yeah. And collusion is sustainable in market 2 only if the probability adjusted discount factor in each firm is greater than 1 minus AS, which is greater than 1/2. Okay. So remember that in market 2, SA2 is less than 1/2. That's why 1 minus less than 1/2 is greater than 1/2. So if the market shares are asymmetric in this case, it has to be that the rho is greater than either this or this. Okay. And if they're not equal, then that means it's harder. Of course, if they're equal, then the rho star happens to be 1/2, which is just the basic Bertrand example. But once you have the different asymmetries here, that the rho star then has to be greater than at least one of them. Okay. And if it's greater than one of them, then it's greater than the other one. Okay. If markets are taken together, then firm A knows that if it deviates from the collusive agreement in either market, then it will be punished in both. Therefore, if it will deviate, might as well deviate in both markets. For deviation not to be profitable, it must be that SA1 plus SA2, okay, pi, which is this, which is this, okay. So we just, again, simplified this second part here and kept SA1 plus SA2, okay, which is greater than or equal to pi PM, okay, which leads to SA1 plus SA2 greater than 2, 1 minus rho, because the pi m's cancel. And therefore, the critical rho for firm A is based on this one. Okay. And there's an analogous result for firm B, which is the critical rho will be essentially 1 minus SB1 plus SB2. So suppose that the firm A has profit share SA1 is equal to 1 in market 1, and SA2 equals 1 minus S in market 2, which is S greater than 1/2. So malakas si firm A, okay? Because firm A has a profit share of 1 in market 1, okay? And 1 minus S, well, malit lang yung share niya basically in market 2. It's less than, because S is greater than 1/2, so the share it receives in market 2 is less than 1. Profit B has profit share of SB1, 1 minus S in market share 1. And SB2, I think this should be S actually. Okay. SB2 is equal to S in market share 2. From the previous equation, the cartel between A and B is sustainable when they operate in both markets for any probability adjusted discount factor greater or equal to 1/2. However, the probability adjusted discount factor would have to be greater than S, which by assumption is greater than 1/2 if the firms collaborate only in one market. Multi-market contact can support cooperation, which is the idea here. Multi-market contact can support cooperation by lowering that adjusted discount factor. So asymmetry is reduced when all the markets in which they compete in are considered. Okay, so in our example, each firm had a share in excess of 1/2 in any one market. Aggregated across markets, each firm has a share of 1/2. So asymmetry is reduced in that sense. Next factor is product homogeneity. So collusion is easier to sustain when cartel members produce homogeneous or nearly homogeneous products. Homogeneous products implies that a price-fixing cartel need only to monitor one price because it's a homogeneous product, everything sells with one price. With differentiated products, need to agree on and monitor different prices for each product. If the latter, meaning there are different prices, right? Because it's somewhat differentiated, then cartel members need to agree on the extent of product differentiation. Punishment for deviation is more complicated in a product differentiated context. However, there are advantages to cartel sustainability in a market with product differentiation. So the temptation to cheat falls when there is substantial brand loyalty. So deviant firms will find it hard to win much business when it secretly cuts the price. So remember, in horizontal differentiation, pag nag-cut ka ng price, that doesn't mean everyone goes to you. If you remember your horizontal differentiated Bertrand, right? Only some can go to you. And therefore, the advantages of deviating will be lower under that in that case where you have this differentiated product. Other factors, facilitating collusion, so observable prices. Trade associations can help facilitate collusive behavior.
Most favored customer clauses guarantee that if sellers offer the same product to another buyer at a lower price, the first buyer will receive a rebate equal to the difference in the two prices. It's anti-competitive because it restricts the temptation to reduce its price, because the price reduction has to be offered to all the previous buyers as well. So most favored customers clauses will tend to be anti-competitive because it will restrict this price reduction incentive, or this incentive to essentially to compete. Meet the competition guarantee. So it's a guarantee that a firm will match any lower price offered by another seller. So it makes the process of detecting cheating particularly effective, because the people will report to you if other firms will have a lower price. So every consumer now becomes an unpaid market watcher. Such monitoring will lead prices to be set higher and identical to all consumers. So meet the competition clauses can also strengthen trigger strategies. So consider a one-period pricing game between two firms. One-shot nature leads the firms to price low. When firms are allowed to publish meet the competition guarantees that are legally and institutionally binding, these make the off-diagonal pairs unattainable. So there's no opportunity to undercut one's cartel partner when each firm has announced a meet the competition policy that is effective immediately. Okay, so we've run through all of the factors that can facilitate collusion. And if you notice that much of them really relies on that VC, which is the value of cooperating, must be greater than VD, which is the value of deviation. And that affects the rho star, which is this critical rho. And the point is, pag tumaas yung critical rho star, it's harder to sustain, because that means the actual rho in the cartel has to be greater than that rho star. Okay. Whereas kung mababa yung rho star, it's easier to sustain because the rho of the cartel, it's easier to be higher than something that is low, right? Higher than the low value of rho star. So that's the relationship between the sustainability of the cartel and the value of rho star. Now, before we end, so we probably have 10 minutes left, less than 10 minutes. So we will share this other paper from Abranica, which is part of our essays. So here's the paper. And it's about detecting and measuring market power in the Philippine wholesale electricity market, right? But one of the things that led me to assign this really is not necessarily the detecting and measuring market power, although that's one of my primary research interests. It's really about the collusion factor here. So there's an investigation of public utilities accused of collusion. Okay. So this was an antitrust or price fixing allegation or investigation in the electricity market when the WESM was first instituted, way back in the 90s. Kailan ba si WESM? The exact date is somewhere here. In fact, let's start there with market reform. Well, it's actually not the 90s. It's in 2006. So it's not that old. It's not that new. It's almost 20 years. Okay, so the WESM began operations in the second half of 2006. So nagkaroon ng restructuring in the electricity markets. And it provided the government to divest, that means to sell off assets in the power sector, and the creation of an independent regulatory institution. Okay. So before, meron kang NPC, which is the National Power Corporation. And the National Power Corporation had to sell off its generating assets to demonopolize generation. Okay. For the purposes of this paper, you can think of them selling a lot of their generating capacity to a special purpose vehicle called the PSOM, okay, which is created to manage and privatize these assets of NPC. Okay. They would also, the PSOM also administers the IPP contracts. So essentially, they're also participating, CPSOM, they're also participating in electricity generation. Okay. So what's the idea of this one? So let's go to this paragraph here. This is the key introductory paragraph. Under WESM, NPC plants have to compete with other generation plants for the right to be dispatched. Okay, so in the new WESM, it's all of the generation capacity has to bid in order to participate. And the idea here is to bid low, because if you bid low, then you will be asked to sell to the market. Okay. If you bid high, then there's a chance that you won't be selling to the market because there are other power plants possibly with a lower bid, and therefore sila yung mauuna. Okay. So that's what we have under the WESM. And under the new regime, the NPC, which used to be this monopolist, right, which is keeping some plants but sold others, have to compete with other generation plants for the right to be dispatched. Okay. Another paragraph here which introduces the people involved is that the WESM has its own market structure. Okay, the ERC retains the oversight, but then there is the PMC, which has its own investigatory powers, okay, constituted by the DOE. So here are the major players, major trading blocks: NPC itself, PSOM, and Meralco. But in terms of operating capacity or installed capacity, 54% is PSOM. So PSOM is this large group of players, right? Okay. So PSOM is actually a bunch of different sets, okay, of trading groups that's aggregated under PSOM here. So let's jump to the actual allegation down here. So after immediately after the first quarter of WESM operations, Meralco lodged a complaint concerning a sharp and continuous increase in the spot market price. Here's the table that sort of says that. So from 2.8 to 5.7. And here's a plot that sort of shows that. Okay. So the question is, saan galing yun? Okay. So there are some indications na, you know, pare-pareho yung kanilang mga bids or offers. And I'll ask you to read that here, dito, and dito. It's page 13 of the paper. So the MSC found suspicious the influence of certain generation plants in market clearing prices. And there were identical first price offers for 3 generation plants from PSOM. So what happened here is that the enforcement and compliance officer discovered in the course of its investigation something interesting, right? It happened that before the alleged incident of price fixing, then NPC President Cyril Del Callar wrote his PSOM counterpart twice to raise the issue of trading losses incurred by NPC, to suggest that the trading teams of the two institutions adopt a common bidding strategy. So remember that the NPC and PSOM, they're competing against each other, right? But here, NPC wrote to PSOM and says that they're the reason. Specifically, the NPC president attributed the company's losses of nearly 2 billion to the low offers of Pisam's trading team. So he's basically accusing Pisam, hey guys, masyado mababa yung bids ninyo. Kayo yung pinatatakbo ng market operator and kami, may loss kami because hindi kami pinatatakbo. Kasi masyadong mababa ang bids ninyo. And that's when in that letter, right, there was a suggestion to adopt a common bidding strategy. So he noted in the letter the following: the average clearing price of NPC IPPs is 56% lower than their average production costs and 59.29% lower than ERC approved average TOU rates. Okay, so the Pisam trading teams are bidding below the ERC approved TOU rates, below the production cost of the IPPs that are bidding, or even at zero if only to maximize the generation dispatch of the IPPs, even if such results in losses to the government. To stem the bleeding of NPC, the president admonished Pisam on how offers should be made. So there's a suggestion that there should be this unified style of offering, right, of price. Yeah. So that the losses of NPC will not happen. All right, so there's a subsequent exchange here and so on. Very interesting part, but the whole idea here is that there's this idea that maybe we'll continue to talk a little bit about this next time because it's already 8:52 and I'll stop discussing it here. But that is essentially where we're at right now. So the NPC president writing to Pisam suggesting that there should be some coordination as to what their offers should be. And dito yung sinasabi natin na actual communication and the fact that the market itself is quite small and intimate, and it's very easy to coordinate actions. And that's one of the reasons why in this particular case, there was this allegation of collusion, okay, which is sort of another sort of reason why, related to what we discussed in the lecture, but this is another reason why this coordination is much easier in smaller industries, okay, which is they're able to communicate more and the results of the market is more transparent. So that's why collusion is a little bit more possible in this case. And in particular, in this case, there is this explicit communication between the NPC president and Pisam. It's very interesting. And next time, I guess we'll finish with our discussion of, well, me showing off Abrenica and making sure that you guys read this particular very interesting part. And it connects very nicely with our discussion on collusion. Okay, so if that's it for me. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes if there are any questions. But other than that, tapos na po tayo. See you on Thursday. And on Thursday, we'll be finishing this, and then we'll be moving to mergers for sure. Horizontal mergers.